everybody. This is Jonathan Simkin, president of 604 Records in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia. And this is another episode of our Versus podcast. And I'm very excited to have a guest on that I've known for a very long time, Alan Boyd Alan's done a lot of things, but we're going to talk about his band Movieland and other things today. And where are you, Alan? You're in London?
I'm in Brixton in London, yep.
Look at you.
Yeah, sitting in my flat in Brixton on bonfire night, which is Guy Fawkes night, and I've got a terrible cold. So I've got a cup of tea with me.
I mean, I'll give a little bit of background to people listening. 604 recently announced a new series of releases under the name Decades, 604 Decades, and Movieland is the first release. They've already put out a single, I Relate. We're putting out another single called A Sort of Icarus, which will be coming out on November 29th. And then the album, Then and Now, comes out on December 13th. And you can stream that and listen to that and anywhere you stream music. It'll be available in all those normal places. Maybe we'll start with trying to establish some timelines because, boy, at my age, I get confused about everything. So when do you think you and I would have met? Any idea?
I think we met probably around 1992 at Downtown Sound, which was a studio at 1010 Seymour. That was run by a mutual friend, Murray McDonald. And there were a lot of bands hanging out there, a lot of stuff going on. And you were coming down there talking about working with musicians and bands in Vancouver. And in that period, because I left Vancouver in 1994, at the end of actually 30 years ago, this September, I left Vancouver. And I used to come up and visit you at your Hastings office in that really cool sort of brown and orange building that was
the Dominion building.
The Dominion building. Yeah. I used to come up to your office, hang out, talk about music, talk about things we could possibly do, you know, what was going to happen. You drink coffee down at the block, down around the corner, all those kinds of things. So that was our sort of, 90s existence and getting to know each other.
So 92, that sounds about right, because 92 is right when I started to do entertainment law, when I was sort of starting to move away from doing criminal law and refugee work and start to move into the entertainment thing. Now, Downtown Sound, maybe that's a great place to start. Downtown Sound, is, as Alan just said, is 1010 Seymour. I didn't remember the address, but thank you. To me, I knew it more as the place that was right across the street from the Penthouse.
Yeah.
And not because I'm a frequenter of strip joints, I'm not, but it just so happens one of my best friends as a kid in Vancouver was Danny Filipponi, whose family owns Penthouse. So it's kind of funny because and I've known Danny since grade 7. We became friends in elementary school. So we would go to a movie on a Sunday with a bunch of friends at the Capitol 6. Remember the Capitol 6?
Oh, yeah. On Granville. Yep, I remember that.
And then we'd go over to the Penthouse, which was closed on a Sunday. And we would just run around like a bunch of, grade 7 idiots and, swing around on a stripper pole. And,
that's why you're good at pole dancing, huh?
That's exactly why, yeah. Yeah, I trained from an early age. And Downtown Sound was right across the street. Now, as I recall, it originally was built as a CBC studio.
Is that right? Yeah, I think you're right, because it had this amazing big room.
Yeah, it was, I believe, a CBC studio, and you're right. It had a beautiful, my memory of it's a little bit foggy now. You'd walk in off the Seymour, and there was a room. That wasn't the studio. That was just more
there was a front
out or...
But we used to rehearse in there sometimes, and so did Wicked Swimming Dog and a couple of other bands. But then there were 2 sets of stairs, one that went up and one that went down. And the downstairs bit went to a little sort of kitchen area and some sort of side rooms. And then there was then we got to the back room where you went upstairs, which led to some offices and then the control room, and then went down to the back room.
Oh, the control room was upstairs.
Yeah, and there was a big window that looks out on it. But it was a great space, and there's lots of good stuff going on there. But, It was we put on parties. We had a couple of New Year's Eve parties, I think. And there's some of that Movieland footage that we shot on 16 mil. It was filmed in the back there. The stuff that's I think it's on some of the videos that we're putting out. But yeah, it was really cool. It was a great place to be able to do stuff, to throw parties, to have fun.
You know, yeah, you're bringing back all sorts of memories. Just sort of as you're saying it, it's all sort of coming back to me. And I mean, you know, I do remember a party there that was part of Music West. If you remember, Music West was a sort of a little mini festival that was put on in Vancouver. It was pretty good, and then it just sort of died out a number of years ago. But I remember going to a Music West party there because it was one of the first dates I ever went on with the woman who became my wife. I remember taking her there, and you know, it was a bit of a scene. It was like its own scene. So it was the kind of place where there was always people there. You could sort of drop by kind of 24/7, and you knew that there was somebody there. Now, off the top of my head, I wrote a list because I was trying to think of who were some of the bands around then. And the ones I remember are Dig.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
What is that dude's name? Do you remember that? There was a major...
Jazz.
Yeah. God, whatever happened to him?
I remember going in there and he tuned his drums. So it was like 3 days tuning the drums for this amazing record that they were all working on for years and years. I don't know if he's ever finished it, but
yeah, it's kind of like the Smiley Smile by Brian Wilson. It's the album that never came out. But I remember Wicked Swimming Dog.
Wicked Swimming Dog, yeah.
And they did have an album that came out that I still have somewhere on a CD, which is quite good.
Yeah. There was a band called Hooli that played there a few times.
Yeah.
Band called Honey.
I remember them, but yeah.
Copyright. We did a gig with Copyright there at one time.
Wow. Because I ended up being Copyright's lawyer in the second stage of their career. Because, of course, Copyright's a notorious band from Vancouver. Amazing band. But they... part of the reason they're sort of infamous, well, a couple reasons. One, the precursor, Slow was what they were called. They're the ones who took their clothes off at Expo. And that was, you know, Expo 86 was in Vancouver. And they played a gig there and they got naked on stage. And that caused the government to just close down that venue at Expo, right? That was that. It's like, you know, which, you know, awesome move on their part. I mean, you got to love that. And, but they are also well known because they were signed to Geffen at a time that really meant something. I mean, that's when Guns N' Roses and Nirvana and Teenage Fan Club and Sonic Youth, and it was a big deal for a Vancouver band to get signed. And then they kind of blew it. They sort of acquired a nasty drug habit. I don't think this is a secret.
No, I think part of it though is they also were told by the story I heard, which could be wrong, apocryphal. You know, I don't think it was, you know, the drugs are one thing, but there's so many people at those things that are in drugs. But it was like, I think they told David Geffen to fuck off when he told them they couldn't call themselves Copyright.
Yeah, the story I've heard, you might have it better than I do, but yes, is that literally at the CD release party, Tom, the singer, you know, just went off on him, and including some maybe some homophobic slurs as well. And
All right.
I don't know if that, I mean, I'm just reporting what I've heard. I wasn't there. And he dumped them on the spot. Like literally the day the record came out was also the day they were dubs from the label. I have the record. I bought it at Music World in Oak Ridge Shopping Mall.
Oh, hang on one sec, because I have it right beside me here.
Oh, you have a copy? Wow, I have the same one at home.
I've been listening to this like the last few days. I love this record. It's one of my favorite records ever.
It's a great record. And funny enough, as part of Decades, I was trying to maybe see about getting the rights to it. And unfortunately, Interscope was not very nice about it, but that's another story. But yeah, that's what I've always heard, because I know that I bought it at Music World in Oak Ridge Mall, like literally the day it came out. It had already had a delete punch in it. Like, really? Yeah, my copy's got a hole punch in it, which is...
I think this one does. This one's pretty clean.
Ooh, nice. Look at that.
But yeah, it's a great record, and it's like, I mean, the artwork and everything in it too. It's amazing because it was all this art that was done at the studio space they had. I can't remember the guy's name. He probably
Grant Head.
That's it. And he did all these amazing gaffer tape pieces of art, and then they photographed it all with this incredible camera, which is the same one they used for the moon landing. I mean, I love this record, and copyright that period and them making that music and being part of that scene in Vancouver was really, I think it was really important because they were pretty inspirational, being slow, and then the copyright record was so different than slow. I think that was the other thing, is Geffen wanted like a Nirvana, and they gave them this kind of much more folky, introspective record. So yeah, really important.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and I guess that also underscores, something else I wanted to talk about a little bit, which is like, it's funny because I don't remember copyright being part of that downtown sound scene, and maybe they were sort of tangential or whatever, but
more tangential, yeah.
There were different sort of scenes in the city at that time, and they were very distinct. Like, the people who hung out at downtown sound were very specific, and then there was like, I'm trying to think, like Zulu.
Yeah.
That was bands like Cole,
Blaise Pascal,
Daytona.
Yeah.
Who I managed, first band they ever managed was Daytona. Vancouver's funny that way. Like it was, Toronto I found always was a little more, everybody knew what everybody else was doing, and there was more sort of commonality between the bands. Whereas in Vancouver, it was like, if you were part of this scene, that was kind of it. Like you were just part of that scene. So, I mean, there was the Zulu scene, there was the downtown sound scene. I think Network kind of was its own kind of thing, because that was like Grapes of Wrath and Sarah McLachlan, and, they were sort of their own thing. It's interesting. I mean,
it was hard to, I think you're right, and it felt hard to get a sort of universality of being a Vancouver scene. And the thing I found about Vancouver in those days was with these amazing, huge universities, yet you didn't really seem to have these university scenes where people were coming to a lot of to gigs. It wasn't like a university town in the States where you really felt that the university powered. Now CITR as a radio station, absolutely amazing, and really helped a lot through all of the scenes. And Nardwuar comes from there, and Grant Lawrence comes out of that too, and that great stuff out of CITR. But yeah, you didn't sort of feel like there was a center and that people just sort of flocked to gigs like the university students and stuff like that.
It's a great point, and you're right about that. I mean, I went to UBC, and it was really not, as much as I was into the music scene, it wasn't like UBC was the center of my music sort of existence. It really wasn't. I mean, Discorder was an important magazine. It just was more for the punk sort of scene, I suppose. But, you're right about that. But Vancouver's always been funny that way. I mean, that includes labels as well. Like, I remember in Toronto, sort of when I used to be there a lot during the sort of, as my career started to grow, and I'd go to Toronto, like every Thursday night, half the music business in Toronto would be at the Horseshoe Tavern. And that's where people would mingle and talk, and you'd find out what other people were doing. Vancouver's always been a bit more diffuse. There just isn't that kind of central sort of scene. I think in some ways that's helped the scene here, and in some ways it's hurt the scene here. You got a lot more sort of weird outliers, like people doing, whether it was Devin Townsend doing his crazy shit Maple Ridge, or whether, like just different people doing different stuff all over the place, not necessarily connected to each other. But lots of interesting stuff going on. There's that sort of Skitty Puppy scene. I mean, lots of really cool stuff happening. Now I wanted to sort of talk about the different versions of Movieland. And here I am putting out the record, and I'm still confused by it all. For no good reason. That's just me and my brain not being good at keeping things straight. But Movieland Mach 1, let's call it. That's you, John Onopu, and Justin Lee, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So it's a 3-piece, and it's the three of you.
It's a 3-piece. It's the three of us. And Justin and I met, we were working at Benny's Bagels, and I can't remember how we decided, but we were just talking about the bands we liked, and we started rehearsing, and he brought in his friend John, who played bass, and that was it. We'd be rehearsing in the front of Justin's house in Richmond. We'd drive down, set up in the foyer of his house, make noise. I've still got tapes from those first jams, actually. It's quite funny listening to them.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, that's goddamn, that's So that would have been 90.
91, I think.
Good Lord. And so on the music that we're putting out, I'm just thinking at the album here, on that record, what are the songs that are those three? It's the one we just put out, right? I Relate.
Yeah. So basically, there's three releases we did, three cassettes that we did in Vancouver. The first one, which was the black one, which had 4 songs on it, that was the three of us. The second one had 3 songs, I think, on it. That was the three of us, and then the last one had 2, and that was a different version of the band.
Okay, so maybe the easier way is to start. So the second version is you and Cam and Clancy.
Yeah.
And which are the 2 songs that's Build Me a Dream?
Build Me a Dream and She's a Mountain.
And so everything else is you, Justin, and Sean.
That's right.
Interesting, because I was listening to I Relate. I was excited when it came out on Spotify, and I was listening in my car, and I have a nice sort of system in my car, and I mean a few things struck me, but one thing that really struck me was John's bass playing.
Yeah, it's fun,
and it's melodic as fuck. Like it's just I was just kind of focusing on his, on a couple of the listen throughs, I was focusing on his bass playing, and it's really impressive. Like it's just melodic, and I'm big on sort of bass players who are almost doing their own thing in a weird way, and almost like playing their own song. Like I was always a big Entwistle fan with The Who for that reason, because he was doing stuff you could almost just. I used to say, you listen to Entwistle's bass and, it's better than most demos I got from full bands, like, John's I guess I didn't realize it at the time, but I guess, listening to the stuff now, I'm sort of going, man, the 3 of you were really very skilled even at that time.
Yeah, I thought it was cool. And I think there was a really good sort of way that all came together. I mean, I liked making all the big noises and messing around with that. And John had this great melodic bass, and then Justin just had this really strong kind of trippy drumming that just sort of skipped along and sort of drove things forward.
How long did that version of the band last, more or less?
What, 2 years, I guess? I mean, we weren't around for a long time. That's the thing. Our journey was pretty short, and before I left and before I came over here, and they decided, because I kind of wanted to get to a more experimental, noisy, big sonic stuff, and I think they were less interested in that. I actually remember John really wanting to do much more melodic pop kind of thing, so they went off and decided to do Pluto, and that's when I kind of met Clancy. It must have been through Adam, because he was doing Perfume Tree with Adam. I can't remember Adam's last name. Adam Sloan, I think it was. They had this band Perfume Tree, and he engineered that second set of tapes with I Relate and stuff like that. We did it at his studio, and that's how we met Clancy. But yeah, so that's kind of where the split happened.
Yeah, because it's a lot. Pluto was a more traditional, kind of straightforward pop band, and they were a good band, but it was, more traditional song structure, more straightforward. Movieland has a trippiness to it that just wasn't in the Pluto stuff. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I was joking about this a lot, because they used to call me My Bloody Alentine. And I laugh about that because, when I think I told you the story once, when I moved over here in 94, kind of wanting to get into the music over here and, find out about the scenes and find out what was happening in the UK, I bought tickets to go see Slowdive. And I was heading off to see them at the gig. And the gig got canceled because they'd only sold 7 tickets. And, that scene, everybody mocked it to death. They hated the sort of shoegaze thing. My friends gave me, they had records that they were given, reviewing it and stuff. People I'd met over here, they always laughed about that music. But then, 15 years later, suddenly the band's come back. They've got these massive audiences and they're doing really well. And I kind of think that's a little bit of what's happened with the Movieland stuff. I don't think we were understood. I mean, yes, we were understood by some, but I don't think the people that were wanting to give money and put out records kind of understood how that was going to happen, how that was going to develop.
Well, sure. And I mean, I was, this was long before I owned a record company. So, I mean, this predates 604 by at least a decade. And, at that time, the business was very different. And what lawyers did in the business was very different, because I essentially made a living, as they called it, shopping bands for record deals. I tried to do that for you guys. I think we had a couple of bites, but never led to anything. And it usually doesn't lead to anything. I mean, I had a very good batting average. I had a good track record with this stuff. But even so, what does that mean? Maybe 1 out of 10 bands I shopped got signed. You weren't one of them, and a lot of great bands weren't one of them. And it just one of those things. And I think, it stayed with me. Like, the disappointment of that stayed with me. And I always took that stuff probably a little more personally than I should have. But on some level, for me, it's like, I let you down. I let these bands down. And it bothered me. Well, shit, here I am 30 years later, putting this music out, going, you know what? God damn it. If
Now I can.
yeah. If they're not going to get a deal, I'm going to give them a deal. And I just love it, because, I mean, for me, it's an opportunity to shine a real light on not just your band, but, on the stuff we're talking about right now. I mean, Vancouver was a vibrant musical city, still is, but I mean, that was a hell of a time,
It was a weird time, because I remember meeting a guy from A&M Records who came out.
Alan Reed.
Was that him?
Yeah.
From Toronto.
Yeah.
And the kind of, he was talking about how much he loved Vancouver, and it was the same things that everybody said. It's because, like, man, I can go skiing, I can go sailing, I can go golfing all in the same day. And you're like going, but what about the music? He goes, oh yeah, we'll go see some gigs.
Yeah.
But, it's like that. And then I sort of sense, because it was a very different world, the pre-digital world, that, somebody like him might come to Vancouver, find a band, then he'd take it back to Toronto and try to share it with somebody at his label to get them interested. And if they got the interest, then they had to fly to LA and talk to somebody in LA and say, hey, what do you think about this band as adding to our Canadian roster? Maybe we can get them to the States. So there's a real sort of a lot of steps to get through and to get seen.
Yeah, and it was very different. I mean, it's one of many ways the business is different. I mean, at that time, in the 90s, and before, the major labels were the gatekeepers. I mean, that was it. If you were not on a major label, your odds of having any success were like zero. Because they were the gatekeepers to radio, they were the gatekeepers to retail, they were the gatekeepers in some ways to gigs. If you were on a major label, it was hard to get an agent. It was just plain difficult. And of course, now it couldn't be any more different. I mean, now everybody's putting out stuff all the time. You don't need a label. You put it up on YouTube, you put it up on Spotify, you put it up wherever. And then if you have something react, then labels are interested. Like, it was really more about being a true talent scout back then. Like, I would listen to a band and go, geez, this band's good. They deserve to have a release. And I think there's an audience for this band. Whereas now, nobody thinks that way. I still do. But I mean, major labels certainly don't. They have people who sit there scouring the stats on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm not saying it's better or worse. I'm just saying it's different.
It's different.
But that's why I think in some ways not getting bands deals then hurt even more, because it was harder. There wasn't an easy plan B. Like,
no,
there kind of is now. Like, now getting signed to the label's almost the plan B. Plan A is make some music, get it out there, and try and get some people to give a shit. It's very interesting to me, but yeah, so we tried to shop you for a deal, and it's funny because Pluto, of course, ended up getting a big deal. And I was involved in that. Like, it's just funny how these things all, because I was the lawyer for Mint Records. Pluto signed to Mint, and then Virgin got interested in Pluto, and they did a deal, and of course, nothing really happened. So just goes to show you, I don't know what it shows you. It just goes to show you that even when you get signed, sometimes that's really doesn't get.
I find it really interesting right now watching the last 2 weeks of what's happened with the I Relate single going out, and the pickups on. So there's all these blogs, and there's all these online radio stations, there's all these different ways out, the music being listened to in playlists. And we're on a great playlist on Spotify. And it's getting people listening to it. And they're, and they can find it now. And now your niche, this thing that you would have had trouble in the 90s finding that right audience and that right niche. Now the world's out there looking for it, and they can sort of dive in and find these things.
People complain about the Spotify stuff a lot, and I get it. Like, people feel like the royalty rates are low, and I'm not even going to address that. I will just say, I was one of the people that Spotify approached before they actually launched in Canada. They made the system, they made it available to, I guess, tastemakers. And I was one of the lucky people who was able to use it. So the download store existed then. And Spotify existed in other countries, but it didn't exist in North America yet. And
no, I had it here in the UK.
Well, I listened to it. So I downloaded it and I got it. And I was like, yeah, I should see what this is about. I knew within 30 seconds of fucking around on there, this is it. This is the future. This is now. It was so easy. I still have a big vinyl collection, but it's almost more like it's become like collecting merch. I listen to vinyl, but Spotify and Apple Music and Amazon and YouTube is so easy. It is easy.
And it's fascinating because you can just dive in and say to somebody, hey, have you ever listened to, there's a guy I was working with, my friend Freddie from the Vaccines. And I say, have you ever listened to, I don't know, I'd say Chuck Berry or something, this song. And he'd go, oh no. And then he'd come back and say, oh, I'll send you a tape or I'll send you a list. He goes, oh no, it's all right. I've already listened to every single thing by Chuck Berry. I went home last night and just got it on Spotify and listened to it, It's all just there for you.
I love it. I mean, honestly, I really love the way the music business works now. And again, I know not everybody agrees with that, but I certainly love it now as a fan, not just as a guy who owns a record company.
Well, it's a different thing. And I think there's guys I know from the 60s who I've been working with here are old session players, and they talk about recording, how, they miss the days of the studio, but they all go, look, it's just a different world. It's a different thing. People could do amazing things at home on their computers that are better than anything the Beatles could ever have done, because they don't have, they didn't have that technology, but they don't have that sense of being in the studio with other players, creating things like the Beatles might have done. Yeah. It's a different thing.
Yep, exactly right. So, no, I'm stoked, man. I mean, the album comes out December 13th.
Yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to it. I mean, I've been listening to it. The irony, of course, for me is I've been listening to it since 92. Bill. And I do. I mean, I had it all on my personal iTunes, just as MP3 files. And, I've been listening to it. Now, I was just looking at the list of songs that's going to be on the album. And I've always thought there was one song that was a bit of an outlier from all the other ones. Do you know which one I'm talking about?
I don't know. Is that San Francisco? That's our Dinosaur Jr. song, basically,
I love that song. And I think, if memory serves, it's the one at the time that really made me go, I want to work with this band. Even though now, the whole thing, I sort of listen to and go, shit, it's validating, because I listen to it and go, yeah, you know what? This is really good. I wasn't just me being, whatever. I mean, this really is, quality music. But that song, for some reason, is the one, maybe because it's the one that in a way is the most straightforward, and in a way sounds like it could have been on the radio, and, it just sort of has that sound to it. It's a guitar sound.
So. But I think, to be fair, when John and Justin did leave, I remember John saying he wanted to do more sort of poppy stuff. And I remember cracking out a riff and going, what, like this? And playing something. He goes, yeah, like that. I said, I don't want to do that. Vince, And I don't regret those decisions, but I can see how that can be frustrating in a sense, because if you're looking to try to get those deals and try to do that thing, that's kind of more the stuff they wanted, in some ways. But I think, because there's new songs that I've done for you as well, and some of those are a bit more along that line. They follow a bit more the sort of straighter songs in some ways. They're still noisy and crazy, but they've got that poppy thing.
100%. Now, when you listen to these songs now, all these years later, what's that like? I mean, are you proud of it? Do you go, shit, that's good? Or, oh God, I hate some aspects of this? Or what's it like with the sort of the perspective of, literally decades later?
I think it's been fun to listen to them. I could kind of see how I could have crafted some things a bit more solidly, and I've done some, we did a few cut downs and like edits for radio and stuff like that. I think, oh, that's kind of good actually. That crafting of a song and, understanding, maybe I could come in a bit quicker. Maybe I could do this, maybe we could do that. But I think for the technology we had, which was very limited, the budgets we had to make things, I think we did pretty good. And for being kind of sort of pushing the envelope a little bit and try to be something a bit different, I think it was cool,
I didn't even ask this. Did you record this at Downtown Sound?
The first 4 songs were recorded at Downtown Sound, and they were live. They were just straight to DAT, and we just like kept doing takes until we got what we liked. So sometimes you can hear a little pop of a pedal going on or off, or you can hear little sort of bits of mistakes. But that was really cool. I always liked that. We called that live off the floor.
And would I Relate be one of those?
No, I Relate was then recorded on a Fossex 8-track at Adam Sloan's place. And yeah, so I actually have the 8-track, and I got it digitized and remixed it. But it's there's not a lot of space on there to make the music, to make the sounds happen.
Are you the one playing that kind of trippy synth in that song?
It's a guitar.
That's a guitar.
Yeah, so that's just a guitar feeding back, doing a guitar feedback sort of pass where I sort of took off a lot of the high end. So my Rickenbacker on the 12-string, and then just had all these distortions on, and then just sort of running it up and down to get those tones off of it.
Wow, isn't that, here I am discovering this 30 years later. Okay, well that's because I love that line. Like, it's just it kind of drives that song. And
I also just got my tremolo pedal at that time too, so that's why suddenly there's all this like heavy tremolo all over it too. The 2 guitars, the big loud, there's that big sort of washy line, and then the big tremolo guitar over the top of it.
Yeah, gotcha. So let's talk a little bit about Movieland Mach 2,
Yeah.
which is Clancy and Cam. Did you guys make a real sort of go of it? I mean, did you, because it felt like that was kind of like the I don't know, the tail end of things. Like it sort of, I mean, what do you remember about sort of, how that sort of came to an end, or like sort of what that run was like with them?
Well, we put that together, and Clancy was playing with Perfume Tree as well. And then Cam was a friend of mine from Edmonton who moved out to Vancouver as well. We started together in a band. We were in high school called Edgware Road. And then, then we met up again in Vancouver, and we put that together. And there were some good things that came out of it, but I just feel like, it was a tail end. It was like I was trying to push on with this thing, but I don't think anybody really understood it, kind of what I wanted to do. We'd go to recording studios, and I'd say, okay, put the vocals down and put the guitars up. They go, no, you can't do that. Vocals have to be this much above everything else. I'd be going, no, look, just try it like this. And, so I found it was a real fight almost against sort of everybody and everything around. And, you're playing to empty rooms. You go play these shows down in Gastown. There was one right at the top of Gastown on a corner. And you went in and you went downstairs, and I can't remember what it was called, but
the Odyssey, the Odyssey.
Maybe it was the Odyssey.
I think that was it. The Purple Onion, and then there was the Odyssey. And then it was the Savoy, which was upstairs. Oh, yes. But yes, right, yeah.
And we played there a couple of times, and it's like there's like 8 people on a Thursday night, and and it's rainy out and it's depressing, and it just felt like it was just not happening, Yeah. And I think we also, we did gigs at the Cruel Elephant and stuff like that when it was down there. Remember, because it was on Granville for a while too, wasn't it? At Sweet Point. And, there were some good gigs, or some less good gigs, but I just ended up hanging out with the guys from SNFU who I knew from Edmonton. And one day, you know, they said, "Oh, we're going to go on a tour to Europe." This is 30 years ago, literally. And I said, "Okay, I'm coming with you. I'll sell everything I own." And I sold everything I owned in 2 weeks, bought a ticket and left. And that was it. I was gone.
Yeah. So how did you, actually, I'm going to get into that in a second, but like, one thing that's been nice about this process is being back in touch, not just with you, but also being back in touch with, Justin and John and Clancy. Cam, of course, passed away. What else had? When did he pass away?
Oh man, that's like 20 years ago or so. He was in a car crash, sadly, in Vancouver. So that was quite early on when I was here, like maybe 2002 or something like that. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, that's sad. And I mean, it's been very interesting to sort of be back in touch with John and Justin. And I've actually, stayed in touch. Like Justin, or I should say, John sends me music.
Yeah.
He still makes music, and
Yeah.
I ran into him at a comedy show that we were promoting, which was great. And Justin came by the office just to pick my brain about some stuff to do with music business, and it's been amazing. Like, to be honest, that's been like super fun. I am curious. So you go on this tour with SNFU. How do you end up staying in England? Like, what happens? Like, because I remember being kind of surprised. Like, I at some point I had heard that. I was like, oh shit, like Alan's in, like, somebody's like, did you know Alan Boyd's in England now? It's like, what? No. Like, I knew he was on a tour, but I didn't know he lived there.
Yeah, no, I think I was just sort of with a friend one night and feeling like I couldn't feel like I could get anything done in Vancouver. I felt it was like very frontier town, and, I know we tried, and I was always coming out and hanging out with you and talking about stuff and other people, but I don't feel like I was kind of, the kind of thing I wanted to do people didn't seem to get it, or maybe they didn't get me, or something like that, because I was trying to sort of push some weird experimental, whatever it was, be a bit noisy, be a bit crazy. I was working with my friend Jonathan Orr, doing sort of stuff with tape loops and an 8-track, and we had this project that we were working on that eventually became something called Saint Just Vigilantes, which we released over here. But I think I just decided I had to get out. I felt like Vancouver, I was having trouble finding work. And I just thought, well, this place is going to, there's nothing for me here right now. It's not working for me. So I decided to go. And then it was afterwards that I found out the band was going. And I said, oh, I'll come over with you guys and I'll stay at the end. And that's what I did. So at the end of the tour, which was very fun, we were opening for Green Day, and Dookie had just come out, and Bad Religion. So it was a great tour to be on. It was really cool. And then I stayed in Germany for 2 months with a friend in Heidelberg. And then met somebody on the tour who had a t-shirt company, a merch company, moved to London, got a job. And that was it.
And then eventually you got married and had kids. And
yeah, it all happened. Got married, had kids, worked doing film, TV stuff, doing sound, doing TV, film, music. I've just had a film and a documentary festival here that was played like a week ago. I'm working on a film about the session musicians from the 60s and 70s, people that played with Bowie and Lou Reed and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's been amazing. The people I've met and the sort of cycle of London that I've lived in,
Do you contemplate coming back here at some point to live, or you're not sure?
Possibly. I mean, there's reasons to come back to do with family and things like that. London's an interesting city because it changes. Like all these kind of big cities, they develop, and it's really expensive here right now. And it's not what it was when I moved here, right? But then when I moved here, the guys I knew from 30 years ago are saying, oh, it's not what it was 30 years ago, as they were moving out. I think it's this place that sort of brings certain people in and out, and you flow through it. Unless you're kind of like in a sort of straighter positions, or you're a family that's always been there. But
yeah. It's funny. I've been to London once. I went the summer that Chad Kruger and Avril Lavigne got married.
Oh wow, yeah, okay.
Because that wedding was in France. So we took our family over. I took my wife and kids, and we went to the wedding, of course. We spent some time in the south of France. We spent some time in Paris. We spent some time in London. I liked London, but I found it a little frantic for my liking.
Yeah.
It felt just a little like New York's a busy city, yet I never felt as sort of in the frenzy of a city like I did in London. It just felt like every time you stepped into the street, you could get hit by a car or something. Like it just felt like the action was so perpetual and everywhere. Whereas Paris, I think in a weird way, I kind of enjoyed more because I always felt like I was in a state of meditation in Paris. So you kind of walk around at night and you're looking around and you're just like, what the hell's that building? And then you take a closer look and it's like, holy shit, like 1647. And then you're looking at this architecture and it just, I found it a little more meditative than I found London. But I had a blast still in London. I mean, going to all those, even going to like the rough trade, record store and like all that
Rough
stuff.
trade's amazing. I think the one thing that's happened though is post-COVID, things have changed a lot. So post-COVID, like everywhere, like, when I go back to visit Canada and see what's happened to city centers post-COVID, same thing happened to London. And I thought that was going to mean that all these new cool places might open up. But what's happened is the center of town just turned into like, what is it like? These American candy stores and Harry Potter shops and wizard shops. So suddenly you have this whole central bit, which used to be very much mixed between kind of tourism and Londoners, is now just like this huge tourist place. So it's changing, it's changing in ways that are kind of turning it into a kind of a bit more of a museum city than a living city in some ways. That said, there's different areas, but I'm also older now, I'm in my 50s, I'm not in my 20s. And when you're in your 20s, you've got the energy to go out, to do things, to be there and discovering everything. And now I'm kind of like, okay, where's there a gig? I'll go check. I saw Big Star the other day. It was amazing, and I'm going to see a great band called Pigs in a couple of weeks. There's all these great
Who's in Big Star now since everybody's dead?
Well, it's Jody Stevens on the drums, and then they were doing Mike Mills from
REM.
John Hour from Posies.
Because they played with them. Like I know the Posies guys, Ken Stringfellow and John Hour, they both played with Alex Chilton towards the end. So that's interesting that they're still involved.
It was so good. They did this Radio City gig. It was just amazing.
Meaning they played that album?
Yeah. Played the album from beginning to end. And then they put a bunch of other stuff in, Chris Bell stuff, Big Star stuff, everything. So that was really fun. Wow. But you still get, there's still lots of stuff here, but I think, as far as the sort of band scene, the rock scene, I think London's much more about grime music, hip hop, British hip hop and grime. That's the music that's happening here now. Soul, the jazz scene in London's amazing. Yeah, it's incredible. But rock bands, it's not really a big thing, Guitar bands are not the London thing at the moment. And the venues that used to put them on are all shutting down,
Whereas here, it feels like guitar bands are coming back, which
cool.
It's funny. Like one thing that's happened, which is interesting, is there's a bunch of stations now that are putting into effect a sort of a new format that they're calling classic alt.
Okay, classic alt.
So like there's one in Calgary, there's one Power 97. Yeah, exactly. Except the problem with you, like it's funny because I've been debating, do I send the Movieland stuff? But of course, they're more like a Jack FM for that period of time. So they're playing hits from that period.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me, like suddenly, whether it's Nickelback or Creed, all these bands that were sort of, and they're not really part of that scene. They were a little bit later in time, but still, it's funny how that, suddenly guitar bands are sort of back.
I say that about there not being guitar bands, but there's a really cool place not far from where I live, in an area called Camberwell, a pub called The Dispensary, and it's near Camberwell Art College. And there's a friend of mine who's got a record shop across the street called Dash the Henge. And there's always bands on in there. And they're cool, and they're kind of art school, and they're weird and they're crazy. Now, are they going to get record deals and top the charts and things? I don't know. But then going back to what we said earlier about this new way of listening to music, some of these bands can come through and do some really cool stuff and do really well. But I think that's, again, it's like there's areas in London is like a collection of villages, you know, and in the 60s, used to do tours of London. Like the bands would play all the different areas. The Rolling Stones would play 20 venues around London. If you lived on the West, you wouldn't go to the East because, you know, eventually they come there. But now, you know, if there's a gig, which the one I went to, the Big Star gig was all the way across town for me. So it took me an hour and a bit to get there. Worth it, but you got to travel.
Yeah, exactly. You know, one of the things that appealed to me about doing this wasn't just, you know, how much I love the music, but, you know, when I approached you about this and I kind of said, hey man, do you have any like video content, or do you have any other, and man, you had just like a treasure trove of stuff. You know, it's funny because most of that never saw the light of day. It's going to see the light of day now. What do you remember about that? Like, why were you documenting it at the time? Was there a specific purpose, or you just kind of felt like, geez, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe we should have this footage, or was it even that conscious? Was it just like, hey, let's film this, you know?
I think there were a couple of things. One was that my best friend, Nick Kopus, who's now a director who lives in LA, and does, you know, he does a lot of mainstream big shows. He was studying at Emily Carr, right? And so he'd say, oh, I need to shoot something for this thing I'm doing. So let me get a camera out and I'll borrow a camera and we'll go shoot some stuff. So we'd shoot things with Nick, him borrowing the gear from Emily Carr and hanging out in that scene. And then the second thing was our friend Bill Mullen, who we met through the Downtown Sound scene again, through Murray and Downtown Sound. And Bill was a filmmaker as well, who'd done that Terminal City Ricochet, you know, the film with, what's his name, Jello Biafra. And Bill would just film and video stuff, you know. So a lot of the stuff that we have on video of shows and performances was by Bill. And Nick and Bill worked together to make the only video we put out, which is for a song called Rant, that it was on Much Music and everything. So yeah, so we just have these things. And then we used to also, there's some animation that we did. We'd like stay up all night in this big house we lived in Shaughnessy. Devonshire Crescent is where we lived. And we would make animations. We had this Bolex camera. We'd sit there making these animations. So we've been using some of that in the stuff that we...
So was that thing, like, I know when you go on Spotify and they have that little animation, is that one of them? It is, right?
I think so. I think...
I'm talking about, like, if you go and on Spotify, you know, what do they call them? There's a name for the little things they put. I'm just going to look at it right here. But because I was like, holy shit. Like, and that's Bill, right? I mean, I think that's all Bill.
Well, yeah, we did the animation together, and then Bill did the video for I Relate, which is like him sort of cutting up and using some of that animation and cutting up our posters and just going through our stuff for that. Is that up on Spotify? I didn't know that the thing was up on Spotify.
Oh, you know what? I always get confused. I mean, I own a record company and I still find this stuff confusing. I think it's only on the app, on the mobile app. So I'm just going to look on my phone because I sent a quick note to Joseph, who works for me, has been helping me with this project.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there it is. If you look at here, I'll show you I can just show you. It's...
Oh, fantastic.
Right? So it's gone.
Yeah.
So who did those animations? That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, so that's Bill mixing the animations that we did together with stuff that he's doing on his own, with stuff that he's put together now from old posters and everything that we scanned in.
I love it. I love it. Like, to me, it's such a wonderful, like, the fact that you had all that stuff really made this a no-brainer to me. It was just like, man, you know, and yeah, there's a part of it that I suppose is a bit of a vanity thing for me. Like, you know, you get old and you sort of like, I'm going to put out this stuff that I loved, you know, 20 years ago. But it's a real interesting document of a period of time.
Yeah, definitely.
Both the music, but also the videos and stuff. So I'm really excited for people to see that. The I Relate video is out.
Yeah.
And we'll be putting out more video content as we go through this process, which I'm super excited about.
Yeah.
And you know, I wanted to ask you also, like, when I got a hold of you about this, were you surprised?
Uh, we talked. So we talked a little bit before. I think it was when you just before you came over to that trip to London or something after. And I think we talked about how I could get you the MP3s of the Movieland stuff. I can't remember how it worked, or you had just been listening to them or something, and we were just chatting. And I think you were in the early days of 604. And then when you actually did ask and say, look, I'm thinking of doing this, I thought, oh, well, you've always supported. I know you and I have caught up here and there over the years, and you've always been very supportive. I remember you got me to try to work on Lynn Kellerman's project years ago, which unfortunately didn't work out. But you were always there, kind of saying, "Hey, let's do this, let's do that," and you always talked about the Movieland stuff. So when you asked in the end and said, "Look," I think you pretty much said, "Look, man, I love Movieland. I've got a record company now. I can do this. Let's put it out. You up for that?" Yes, please. Thank you. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's been a very pleasant process. I mean, it's just been very satisfying on a million different levels. And we've only put out one song, so I'm excited for everything else that's to come. And the fact that it's getting a bit of radio play, the fact that it's getting playlisting on Spotify for a record that was made 30 years ago, holy shit!
Yeah.
And I'm just stoked. Like,
What? Because I know, is it Pure who's one of the other artists that you're putting out on the Decades thing?
correct. So the second release is going to be Pure, and very different circumstances than Movieland, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Pure, I was their lawyer after they had gotten a couple of record deals. Like, they're a funny band because like they had more record deals than just about any band I know, because they were After All and were signed to Network. And then I guess Network had a deal with EMI at the time, and EMI could, what do they call it when you, not upscale, but you could upstream it. So they EMI took the band as After All, and they had a little bit of a hit with that Shadows of a Dove song. Funny video if anybody wants to watch it, that if you want to see what videos from the 90s look like. But and then it didn't work out. The singer quit, and then they became Pure, and Jordy went from just being the bass player to being the singer as well. Then they get signed to Reprise. They get signed to this massive US deal. Jerry Harrison from Talking Heads produces the first album. And then, their A&R guy got fired, which, very common story in this business. And all of a sudden they've got this beautiful record and nobody gave a shit.
Yep. The new guy that comes in doesn't want to deal with it. Yeah.
And then it's kind of over. When I started working with them, it was on their next record deal. I mean, you would think, how many deals could any one band get? They signed to Mammoth Records. Mammoth picked up the older record, Generation 6 Pack. They added some new songs to it. And, it's just one of those things where unfortunately it just never caught fire. Like, music fans loved them. They had their audience, but it just never, and even had a couple of small hits, but it just never really caught fire. And then of course, tragedy in that band as well, with the guitar player, Todd, committing suicide, which has got to be now 12, 13 years ago.
Right.
Which, so I guess in a funny kind of way, in the same way with Movieland, I've always had this something in my heart that kind of went, this band deserved better, and God damn it, I'm going to, shine a light on it. I feel sort of similarly about Pure, but it's got that extra added element of, like, I didn't really know Cam very well. I maybe met him once or twice. I was close with Todd. When that happened, it was just, so same thing where it feels like just putting out the music, it's not just about the music. It's a lot about the music. It's mostly about the music, but there's something cathartic about it too. And it almost feels like a tribute to a fallen comrade. I mean,
yeah, I can feel that, man. I understand that. And I think the interesting thing about the music and the Decades project is, now people can make music, they can put it out, everything just gets up and out and it's there no matter what, and I think it was harder to get it recorded and get it made in the past, let alone get it out. So to have you guys curating and going through some of the best of that period that got missed out on, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be really fun to hear it,
And we're getting a bunch of, like, now that there's been a little bit of press about it,
Yeah.
Now the bands are coming out of the woodwork, sort of saying, I don't know if you remember me. I sent you my demo in '94, sort of thing. And
I'm waiting for the Wicked Swimming Dog reunion.
you where are they? What the hell ever happened to them? Um, yeah, although they wouldn't qualify because I'm only putting stuff out that's never been put out before.
Right.
As part of decades.
Yeah.
Like we're putting out some more music with you, but that'll probably just be 604 proper. Decades is supposed to be stuff that's never come out before. But anyway, I was going to ask you something. The name Movieland,
Yes.
which I think is one of the best band names ever. Tell us about I know the story, but you tell us the background of that name.
Well, it's just got to be about that great neon sign on Granville, right? You're just wandering around and I'm not from Vancouver. I'm from Edmonton. And, Vancouver was famous for its neon, wasn't it, at one time, I think? The old Hastings neon, and there's some great signs. And I still see stuff like that there. But that Movieland sign, I just loved it. And, you'd be taking the bus, the number 10 or wherever, from living in Kitsilano to get into town or anything that's going along there. You just see it all the time. It was slightly dingy. It was a bit dirty. It was a bit run down, but it was still this iconic.
Well, for those who don't know, which is probably most people, it was like a pinball. It was like a kind of nasty pin, and I say nasty and cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of a nasty pinball arcade that was a bit of a hangout. You could buy drugs there. It was
I think Movieland. I think they showed dirty movies there too, right? That was the Movieland bit. There was a little back area where you could watch dirty movies or something like that for a quarter.
Yeah, so weird place.
Yeah.
And Granville is like sort of an iconic street in Vancouver, maybe the most iconic, because it's sort of where, when you think downtown Vancouver, it's like the Granville Strip is, in my brain, that is what when I was in high school, it's like, we're going downtown, you tell your parents.
Exactly.
And what that really meant was, maybe trying to buy some pot on Granville Street, at Movieland, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then but it's kind of, it was that main artery, and then it had, it went down to Hastings, and then you turn around the corner there into everything that was down in Hastings and what that had to offer. It's like there's a very sort of specific layout, because I did a lot of walking around town, just, trying to figure things out. And when we were, Yaletown just started when we were there, so there was a few little gigs going on, and people trying to put on parties, but that was kind of this sort of, this kind of area of models and like trying to be that kind of New Yorkie warehouse thing, and playing gigs down there. What was the pool hall called? Automotive or something like that?
Oh yeah. I forgot about that. That's right. Yaletown's funny in Vancouver because when I was in high school, it was just Scaryville. Like it was warehouses and not an area of town you wanted to be at alone at night. And then it somehow turned into this kind of yuppie. I don't know how that happened. It just kind of, and now I hear it's kind of scuzzy again. I'm not down there very often. It's not something I do very often, but
no, it's that's, again, it's the Vancouver thing. There's sort of these areas. I guess it's like London or LA, It's like it's a place you go to, areas for things to happen. You don't really get the sense of there being a central bit that kind of, everything goes on in or whatever.
Well, it's funny because like 604 Records is located in an area of town called Railtown, which I don't remember that name when I was a kid. Like I don't remember this area. Strathcona, yeah. But Railtown, to me, it was more just kind of considered shit town. It was nasty. Industrial, a lot of drug stuff. Like when I had a drug problem all those years ago, funny enough, I used to come to the Astoria Hotel to score drugs, which, obviously people can't see where I'm looking out my window. If I could see through the building that's across the street from me, there's the Astoria. So, it was part of my life when I was a drug addict, this area. Then when I became a criminal and poverty lawyer, it was a big part of my life because most of my clients were here. And then who would have known that when I start a record company and end up, buying a building to house it all, I end up back in that same area, which is just weird.
That was one of the things about Vancouver. There's a real dichotomy of like very wealthy people, and and then you just go around the corner and suddenly you're on Hastings, and Hastings in Maine, and the places, the bars we'd be hanging out in down like, the Canby is now much more, posh than it was back then. But, these were the places everybody was hanging out in the bands, just in these areas. And, it's been a long time since I've lived there, but it's incredible that sort of Hastings thing hasn't changed. And I remember touring with bands from New York and bringing them to Vancouver. They go, no, we're from New York, man. We've seen everything. Say, well, welcome to Vancouver. They go, holy shit, I've never seen this before.
Right. And it's funny. It's so funny you say that because, when Nickelback signed to Roadrunner's a New York label. Well,
yeah.
I mean, it doesn't exist anymore, but it was a New York label. And their A&R guy used to come out a fair bit because they were, bands located here. And he used to get me to drive him and other people from New York. He said, hey, man, can you take me by that corner? What's that corner? I'm like, Hastings. It's like, yeah. And like, we'd be with other people from New York and they'd all be same thing. Like, holy shit. Like, are they doing heroin out in the open? So they sure are, and that is still like that. I mean, it's still like
it's sad. It's sad, but it's that bit in Canada that's warm, isn't it? So everybody just gets there and congregates,
Well, I think there's two issues. One is what you just said. The environment is such that people who don't have a house, a home, it's easy to live outside Vancouver. That's number one. Number two, we are the closest North American port to Asia. And so a lot of certain kinds of drugs, now that's changed a bit because I think the drug of choice is no longer heroin here. It seems to be more stuff that comes from South America up. So it's more like, meth.
Yeah, it's weird. It's scary. I've got friends in Vancouver still who work in those areas, and they put a lot of the time and effort and working in the rehab places and doing stuff, and it's pretty intense. But I think that was that feeling of a port city. I mean, I remember feeling that 30 years ago, and still feeling it today. But also, there's that side where you go back to Yaletown again, where there's guys that have Pokemon Ferraris because that's just their fun Ferrari, right? And then on the other side of town, 10 blocks away, you've got a guy with a needle in his arm sitting in a doorway. So that Vancouver scene was a really interesting thing to be living in,
Yeah, and I mean, Vancouver has always been a funny sort of dichotomous city that way because you're right. It's juxtaposed with that is this incredible wealth. There's more Teslas in this city than any city in the world. Those neighborhoods like in Shaughnessy and in West Vancouver are the richest neighborhoods in the entire country. And it makes sense because like any city that is right on the ocean and with mountains, it's expensive. You got to have money to live here. And I understand people bitch about it. But any city in the world where you're living on the ocean is expensive. It just is.
Yeah. Yeah.
But Vancouver's just funny because of the extremity between the incredible wealth and the incredible poverty. I don't even know if there's an answer to this. I mean, I used to think there was. I've given up on thinking there's an answer to it. I think it's just the nature of the beast here. It
is the nature of the beast. It's a unique place, but I think that the feeling of that city, it's got that, but it's also got these amazing universities. It's got this film industry. It's got all this great stuff going on there. But I think, and it'll be great to come back and see what happens, when this record comes out. I'm going to hopefully come and visit for one of the release days and stuff like that. See how it goes. But yeah, I remember in the past just feeling like, where were the scenes that were popping up for the music and stuff like that? Like just the go-to venues and things, and it was a city of traveling from, Broadway over by, or 10th over by the university where there was a really cool cinema, but then you have to go meet people all the way at the other side of town down in, East Van, or something like that.
With cinema, you talk about Hollywood Theater?
Yeah, that was it. The Hollywood Theater.
They've redone it and it's beautiful. And we do both there. It is such a beautiful venue.
Yeah,
it's pretty incredible, to be honest. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up, Alan. I mean, is there anything else you want to say or ask, or I don't know?
Thanks. It's great. It's great to be doing this. It's great to be doing it with you guys in Decades, and the team and everybody that we're working with is really good.
It's awesome.
It's really good. Thanks, Jonathan.